The gallows rope bit deep into Abigail Atwood's neck as she struggled to keep her footing on the wobbly crate beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to give her captors the satisfaction of hearing her beg. Dust swirled around the makeshift execution site on the outskirts of Redemption Springs, where a gang of outlaws had dragged her at dawn. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who crosses the Blackwell Gang," shouted Silas Blackwell, his weathered face twisted with cruelty as he addressed the empty desert around them. "Nobody steals from us and lives to tell about it." Abigail's throat burned with each labored breath. She hadn't stolen anything, she'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing something she shouldn't have in the general store where she worked. Now she was paying the price for her honesty, for going to the sheriff with what she'd seen. "You're making a mistake," she rasped, the words barely audible through her constricted throat. "I only told the truth." Blackwell stepped closer, his boots kicking up dust. "Truth gets people killed in these parts, Miss Atwood. Shame, really. Pretty little thing like you." The 5 men around her laughed, and Abigail closed her eyes, saying a silent prayer. 22 years old, and her life was about to end at the hands of these cruel men. No family to mourn her, no lover to avenge her. Just another forgotten victim in the harsh territory of Arizona, 1883. A distant sound made her eyes snap open. Hoofbeats. Growing louder. Blackwell heard it too. "Finish it," he ordered, nodding to his second in command. Before the man could kick away her crate, a rifle shot cracked through the morning air. The bullet struck the ground at Blackwell's feet, sending him scrambling backward. "Next one goes between your eyes," called a deep voice from the ridge above them. Abigail strained to see, the rope cutting deeper with every movement. A lone rider appeared silhouetted against the rising sun, rifle aimed steadily at the gang. "This ain't your business, stranger," Blackwell called back, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm making it my business." The rider nudged his horse forward, descending the slope with deliberate ease. As he approached, Abigail could make out more details: tall and broad-shouldered, face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, a badge glinting on his chest. "Name's Grant Forrester, U.S. Marshal," he announced, keeping his rifle trained on Blackwell. "And you boys are messing with justice in my territory." Blackwell's men shifted nervously, hands hovering near their holsters but not quite daring to draw. They were outnumbered 5-1, but something in the marshal's steady gaze gave them pause. "She's a thief," Blackwell insisted. "We caught her red-handed." "Then she deserves a trial, not a lynching." Marshal Forrester's voice remained calm, but Abigail detected steel beneath the surface. "Step away from the lady." "Now." 10 seconds passed. Abigail's legs trembled with the effort of keeping herself balanced on the crate. Finally, Blackwell nodded to his men. "We'll be seeing you again, Marshal," he threatened, backing toward his horse. "I certainly hope not," Forrester replied. "For your sake." As the gang mounted up, the marshal kept his rifle steady. Only when they'd ridden a good distance did he lower his weapon and turn his attention to Abigail. "Hold still, madam," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. He approached carefully, as if afraid she might startle and kick the crate from under herself accidentally. Drawing a knife from his belt, he reached up and cut the rope above her head with a single, powerful slash. Abigail fell forward, unable to support herself any longer, and landed against his solid chest. His arms came around her instinctively, holding her upright. "I've got you," he murmured, one hand gently working to loosen the noose still around her neck. "You're safe now." When the rope finally fell away, Abigail drew her first full breath in what felt like hours. The world spun around her, and she clutched at the marshal's shirt to steady herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice ragged. He nodded, studying her face with concern in his deep blue eyes. "Can you ride?" She started to nod, then winced at the pain in her neck. "Yes." Without further discussion, he lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, carrying her to his horse. Abigail was too exhausted to protest the impropriety as he settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her. "I'll take you to town, get the doctor to look at you," he said, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her for the reins. As they rode away from the hanging tree, Abigail leaned back against the marshal's solid presence, allowing herself to feel the relief of still being alive. She didn't know this man who had saved her, but somehow, in his arms, she felt safer than she had in years. Grant Forrester kept his mare at a steady walk, acutely aware of the woman cradled against him. The angry red mark encircling her slender neck made his blood boil, but he maintained his outward calm. He'd seen too much violence in his 8 years as a marshal to let emotion cloud his judgment now. "Mississippi," he began. "Atwood." "Abigail Atwood," she supplied, her voice still rough. "Miss Atwood, those men, what did they want with you?" She sighed, the sound pained. "I work at Donovan's general store in town. 3 nights ago, I was taking inventory after hours when Blackwell and his men came in. They didn't know I was there." She paused, swallowing with difficulty. "They were discussing a stage robbery they'd pulled north of here. 2 guards killed. I reported what I heard to Sheriff Collins." Grant frowned. "Collins should have protected you." "He tried." Her voice dropped. "They shot him yesterday." That explained why Grant hadn't found the sheriff when he'd ridden into Redemption Springs late last night. He'd come tracking the Blackwell Gang after they'd hit the Tucson-bound stage, but he'd arrived too late to prevent further bloodshed. "Is he?" Abigail couldn't finish the question. "I don't know," Grant answered honestly. "But we'll find out soon enough." They crested a rise, and the small town of Redemption Springs came into view in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single main street, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding grassland. Despite its modest size, the town represented civilization in this harsh corner of the Arizona Territory. "The doctor's office is on the east end," Abigail directed, pointing weakly. As they rode down the main street, Grant noticed the curious stares of townspeople. Word traveled fast in small communities, and he suspected many already knew of Abigail's abduction. A few men approached as he reined in his horse outside the doctor's whitewashed building. "Miss Atwood!" "Thank the Lord!" exclaimed an older man with spectacles, rushing forward as Grant dismounted. "We were organizing a search party when we heard about the kidnapping. Mr. Donovan." Abigail acknowledged her employer with a weak smile as Grant lifted her from the saddle. "Sheriff Collins is inside," Donovan said. "Doc Patterson says he'll pull through." Relief washed over Abigail's face. Thank goodness. Grant carried her into the doctor's office, where a harried-looking man in his 50s was washing his hands in a basin. "Another patient, I see," the doctor said, eyeing Abigail's neck with professional concern. "Put her on that cot, if you would." The small room already contained one patient, a gray-haired man lying on a bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged. "The sheriff," Grant presumed. "Marshal," the injured man greeted him weakly. "Heard you were coming." Grant nodded. "Sheriff Collins. Wish I'd arrived sooner. You got here in time for Miss Atwood. That's what matters." As the doctor examined Abigail's injuries, Grant briefed the sheriff on what had happened at the hanging tree. Collins listened grimly, his weathered face darkening with each detail. "Blackwell's gone too far this time," he said when Grant finished. "Those men need to be brought to justice." "They will be," Grant assured him. "As soon as Miss Atwood is settled, I'll go after them." "Not alone, you won't," Collins objected, trying to sit up before wincing in pain. "Blackwell has at least 5 men riding with him. I've handled worse odds." "Marshal Forrester," Abigail's voice interrupted them. She was watching him from the examination table, her green eyes intense despite her exhaustion. "The Blackwell Gang knows these mountains better than anyone. They have hideouts throughout the territory. You'll need someone who knows where to look." Grant studied her thoughtfully. "You have someone in mind?" "Me," she replied without hesitation. "I grew up in these hills. My father was a prospector. I know every canyon and cave within 50 miles. Absolutely not, Grant and Collins said in unison. The doctor finished wrapping a light bandage around Abigail's neck and stepped back. The young lady isn't going anywhere for at least a day. That rope did some damage, though thankfully nothing permanent. See? Grant said to Abigail. Doctor's orders. Abigail crossed her arms stubbornly. A day's rest, then. But Marshal, you'll waste valuable time searching blindly. Blackwell will be long gone by the time you find his trail without my help. Grant wanted to argue further, but her logic was sound. He'd tracked outlaws through the territory before, but local knowledge could make all the difference, especially in terrain as challenging as the mountains surrounding Redemption Springs. We'll discuss it tomorrow, he conceded reluctantly. For now, you need rest and protection. Those men might come back for you. She can stay at my boarding house, offered an older woman who had entered quietly during their conversation. I'm Martha Wilson. My place is secure, and my son Timothy keeps a shotgun handy. Grant nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'll escort you both there and check the security myself. As he helped Abigail to her feet, their eyes met briefly. Despite her ordeal, there was an unmistakable determination in her gaze that both impressed and concerned him. This woman had more courage than most men he'd known, but courage could get her killed if she insisted on joining his hunt for Blackwell. And for reasons Grant couldn't fully explain, the thought of any harm coming to Abigail Atwood troubled him deeply. The boarding house stood 2 stories tall, its whitewashed exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. Grant carried Abigail up the porch steps despite her insistence that she could walk. After the day's events, he wasn't taking any chances with her well-being. Mrs. Wilson led them to a small but tidy room on the 2nd floor. It's not much, she apologized, but it's the most secure room in the house. Only one window, and it overlooks the back garden where Timothy keeps watch at night. It's perfect, Abigail assured her as Grant set her gently on the bed. After Mrs. Wilson left to prepare some tea, Grant inspected the room thoroughly, checking the window locks, examining sight lines from outside, and assessing potential entry points. Satisfied with the room's security, he turned back to find Abigail watching him with an amused expression. Do you always take such precautions, Marshal Forrester? She asked. When someone's tried to kill my witness, yes. He moved to the chair beside her bed. And please call me Grant. Grant, she repeated softly, and he found himself oddly pleased by the sound of his name on her lips. I need to ask you more about what you saw at the general store, he said, forcing himself back to business. Any details you remember about the stage robbery could help track them down. Abigail nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. They mentioned a canyon devil's backbone, I think. Said they'd hidden the strongbox there. Grant's eyes widened. That's significant. The stage was carrying a banked shipment worth over $5,000. They also talked about splitting up. Blackwell mentioned meeting at the old place in 3 days' time. Any idea where that might be? Abigail frowned thoughtfully. There's an abandoned mining camp in the Dragoon Mountains. My father used to prospect there before the ore ran out. It would make a good hideout. Grant studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the exhaustion etched in her features. Despite this, she remained composed, her mind sharp. You should rest now. We can talk more tomorrow. You're going after them, aren't you? She asked suddenly. Tonight, while I'm resting. He hesitated, then nodded. I need to at least scout their trail while it's fresh. Promise me you won't confront them alone, she said, reaching out to touch his arm. Her fingers were cool against his skin. Blackwell is dangerous, and he knows you've helped me. The genuine concern in her voice surprised him. I promise. I'm just going to track them, see where they're headed. Mrs. Wilson returned with tea, interrupting their conversation. After ensuring Abigail was comfortable, Grant excused himself to check on his horse and prepare for his scouting mission. I'll be back by morning, he assured Abigail from the doorway. Be careful, she replied, her green eyes intense. "I'd hate to lose my rescuer so soon after meeting him." Grant tipped his hat, oddly moved by her words. "I'll do my best, Miss Atwood." "Abigail," she corrected with the ghost of a smile. "If I'm to call you Grant, then you must call me Abigail." "Abigail," he echoed, finding he liked the feel of her name. With a final nod, he departed, already planning his night ride. As darkness fell, Grant rode cautiously through the hills, following the trail left by Blackwell's gang. The tracks led northeast, toward the mountains Abigail had mentioned. By moonlight, he tracked them to a narrow canyon before deciding to turn back. She'd been right without specific knowledge of the terrain. He risked losing their trail, or riding into an ambush. It was nearly dawn when he returned to Redemption Springs, tired but satisfied with what he'd learned. The town was quiet as he stabled his horse and made his way to the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson, despite the early hour, was already awake and cooking breakfast. "She had a restless night," the older woman informed him. "Nightmares, I think. But she's sleeping peacefully now." Grant nodded gratefully. "I'll check on her later. Thank you for watching over her." After washing up and changing his dust-covered clothes, Grant visited Sheriff Collins at the doctor's office. The lawman was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than the day before. "Any luck?" Collins asked. "I tracked them to Devil's Backbone Canyon. They've definitely headed into the mountains, just as Miss Atwood suggested." Collins frowned. "That's rough country. You'll need supplies for at least a week." "And a guide," Grant admitted reluctantly. "Miss Atwood was right about that, too." "She's a remarkable woman," Collins said with a knowing look. "Her father was just as stubborn. Old Jim Atwood knew those mountains better than any man alive. Taught his daughter everything before consumption took him 3 years back." Grant absorbed this information thoughtfully. "She's been alone since then? Works hard at the general store. Keeps to herself mostly." Collins adjusted his position with a grimace. "She's had offers pretty girl like that always does but never seemed interested. Too independent for most men's liking." Independence was a quality Grant had always admired, though he'd seen too many lone wolves in his profession end up dead. Sometimes, having someone at your back made all the difference. "I'll need to leave as soon as possible," Grant said. "If Blackwell's heading for that abandoned mining camp, we have less than 2 days to catch him before the gang reunites. Take my deputy, Williams. He's young but a good shot." Grant considered this, then shook his head. "Someone needs to protect the town. Blackwell might send men back to finish what they started." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patterson, who immediately began checking Collins' bandages. Grant took his leave, promising to return before departing on his mission. Outside, the town was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their establishments, and farmers bringing produce to the general store. Grant made his way to the hotel where he'd taken a room, intending to gather his belongings. He was surprised to find Abigail waiting in the hotel lobby, dressed in practical riding clothes, her auburn hair braided neatly down her back. The bandage around her neck was partially hidden by a silk scarf. "You should be resting," he said by way of greeting. "I've rested enough." Her chin lifted in that stubborn way he was beginning to recognize. "The doctor checked me this morning and gave his approval for light activity." Grant doubted that light activity included a manhunt through rugged mountain terrain, but he kept that thought to himself. "I tracked them to Devil's Backbone Canyon. They're heading northeast, just as you predicted." A small smile of satisfaction crossed her face. "The mining camp, then. I knew it." "I'm leaving within the hour," Grant informed her, studying her reaction. "Deputy Williams will ensure your safety here in town." "I'm coming with you," she stated firmly. Despite expecting this response, Grant still felt a surge of frustration. "Abigail, these men tried to kill you yesterday." "I can't risk, it's not your risk to take," she interrupted. "It's mine. And I've already made my decision." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "Grant, you saved my life. Let me help you bring these men to justice before they hurt anyone else. He wanted to refuse her, to insist she stay safely in town. But the determination in her eyes told him she'd likely follow on her own if he denied her request, a far more dangerous proposition. You follow my orders, he said finally. Without question. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Relief and triumph flashed across her face. Perfectly. Have you got a horse? Mr. Donovan is lending me his mare. She's not the fastest, but she's sure-footed in the mountains. Grant nodded, already calculating the supplies they'd need. Meet me at the general store in 30 minutes. Bring only what you can carry on horseback. As Abigail turned to leave, Grant caught her arm gently. Abigail. She looked up at him, her green eyes questioning. Thank you, he said simply. For your help. A soft smile transformed her face, momentarily erasing the hardships of the past days. Thank you for believing I can do this. As she walked away, Grant found himself watching her longer than necessary, struck by her quiet strength. In his years as a marshal, he'd worked with countless deputies and lawmen, but never a woman. Yet somehow, he trusted Abigail Atwood's abilities more than many of the men he'd ridden with. The realization both surprised and concerned him. Getting personally involved with a witness was dangerous for both of them. But as he gathered his gear, Grant couldn't deny that his determination to capture Blackwell had become more than professional duty. It had become personal the moment he'd cut Abigail down from that hanging tree. An hour later, they rode out of Redemption Springs, heading northeast toward the mountains. The morning air was cool, though the cloudless sky promised another scorching day ahead. Abigail rode beside Grant, her posture straight despite her injuries, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead with practiced ease. We should reach Devil's Backbone by midday, she said, pointing toward a distinctive rock formation in the distance. From there, it's about 15 miles to the mining camp, but the terrain gets treacherous. We'll need to take it slow. Grant nodded, impressed by her knowledge. How did you learn to track? My father, she replied, a fond smile touching her lips. He believed a woman should be able to survive on her own in this territory. Taught me to shoot, hunt, find water. Everything he knew. He sounds like a wise man. He was. She fell silent for a moment, lost in memories. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just the two of us. We lived in the wilderness for years while he searched for his fortune. Her smile turned wry. Never found it, of course. Few prospectors do. Grant watched her profile against the landscape. You miss that life? Parts of it. Abigail adjusted her hat against the strengthening sun. The freedom, mainly. Town life has its conveniences, but out here. She gestured to the vast expanse around them. Out here, you answer only to yourself and God. And occasionally the law, Grant added with a slight smile. She laughed, the sound bright in the open air. Yes, I suppose so, Marshal. As they rode, Grant found himself increasingly impressed by Abigail's wilderness skills. She identified plants with medicinal properties, pointed out nearly invisible game trails, and spotted a water source from what looked to him like an ordinary rocky outcrop. By midday, they had reached Devil's Backbone Canyon, where Grant had turned back the previous night. Abigail dismounted to examine the tracks more closely. 5 horses, she confirmed, running her fingers over the impressions in the sandy soil. Headed straight for Rattlesnake Pass. She looked up at Grant. It's the only way through to the eastern side of the mountains. Is there a way we could get ahead of them? Grant asked. Cut them off before they reach the mining camp? Abigail considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. There's an old Apache trail that crosses the ridge. It's dangerous, barely wide enough for a horse in places, but it would save us half a day's ride. Grant weighed their options. The direct route was safer but would almost certainly put them behind Blackwell's gang. The Apache trail offered the element of surprise but at considerable risk. How confident are you about this trail? He asked. I've used it before. Abigail replied. 3 years ago, during a flash flood. It's passable if you know what you're doing. That decided it. Lead the way. They ate a quick meal of jerky and hardtack before continuing their journey. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped noticeably, a welcome relief from the desert heat. Pine trees appeared, their scent refreshing after miles of dust and sage. The Apache Trail, when they reached it, was indeed treacherous and narrow path winding along sheer cliffs, with loose stones that threatened to send an unwary horse tumbling hundreds of feet to the canyon below. Grant found himself holding his breath as Abigail navigated the most dangerous sections, her confidence never wavering. "My father called this the edge of heaven," she said during a brief rest, gazing out at the spectacular vista of mountains and valleys stretching to the horizon. "Said you could feel God's presence up here." Grant understood the sentiment. The beauty was almost overwhelming, a reminder of how small humans were in the grand scheme of creation. "Do you believe that? That God is watching over us?" Abigail considered the question seriously. "I believe He watches. Whether He intervenes." She touched the scarf covering her neck wounds. "Sometimes I wonder." "Yet here you are," Grant pointed out, "when by all rights you should be dead." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that perhaps her survival had been more than mere chance. The moment stretched, filled with a tension that had nothing to do with their dangerous mission. Abigail broke the connection first, turning back to her horse. "We should keep moving. There's a sheltered canyon ahead where we can camp for the night." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountainside, they made camp in the protected canyon Abigail had mentioned. A small spring provided fresh water, and the surrounding rocks offered shelter from the wind that had picked up as evening approached. Grant built a small, nearly smokeless fire while Abigail prepared a more substantial meal than their lunch: beans, salt pork, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence, the exertions of the day catching up with them. "How did you become a marshal?" Abigail asked eventually, sipping the strong black coffee. Grant poked at the fire, watching the sparks rise into the darkening sky. "My father was a sheriff in Texas. Killed by cattle rustlers when I was 16. The memory, though 2 decades old, still carried its sting. "I joined the Rangers at 18, transferred to the Marshals 7 years ago." "You wanted revenge?" "At first," he admitted. "Later, I realized I was good at bringing order to chaotic places. There's satisfaction in that." Abigail nodded thoughtfully. "Is there room for anything else in your life? Family?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. "Never seemed practical. I move around too much, face too many dangers." He studied her across the fire. "What about you? No suitors in Redemption Springs?" A wry smile curved her lips. "As the sheriff might have told you, I'm considered too opinionated for most men's taste." "Their loss," Grant said before he could think better of it. In the firelight he thought he saw a blush color her cheeks, but she quickly busied herself with clearing their tin plates. As night fully descended, Grant insisted on taking the first watch. Abigail didn't argue, the day's ride clearly having taken its toll. She wrapped herself in a blanket near the fire, her auburn hair spilling loose from its braid. "Wake me in 4 hours," she murmured, already half asleep. "Rest well," he replied softly. From his position on a rock overlooking their camp, Grant kept vigilant watch on the surrounding darkness. Occasionally, his gaze would drift to Abigail's sleeping form, an unfamiliar protective instinct stirring within him. In just 2 days, this remarkable woman had somehow breached the professional distance he typically maintained. The realization should have alarmed him. Instead, as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast mountain sky, Grant found himself contemplating possibilities he'd long ago dismissed from his life. Dawn broke with crystal clarity over the mountains, painting the peaks gold and rose. Grant, who had allowed Abigail to sleep through the night despite her insistence on taking a watch, was already breaking camp when she awoke. "You should have woken me," she protested, quickly braiding her hair. "You needed the rest," he replied simply, handing her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Grant felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Abigail's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she'd felt it too, but neither acknowledged the moment. After a breakfast of hardtack and jerky, they continued along the Apache Trail. By mid-morning, they had descended from the high ridge to a forested valley. "The mining camp is just beyond that next rise," Abigail informed him, pointing to a hill ahead. "If Blackwell followed the main trail, we should be ahead of them by several hours." Grant nodded, his mind shifting to tactical considerations. "We'll approach from the east, keep the sun at our backs. How many buildings are in this camp?" "Four main structures: the assay office, a bunkhouse, a stable, and the mine supervisor's cabin. Plus several smaller shacks and the mine entrance itself. Perfect place for an ambush," Grant muttered. "We'll need to be careful." They left their horses concealed in a grove of pines and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the underbrush. As they crested the final hill, the abandoned mining camp came into view below a collection of weathered wooden buildings surrounding a cleared area, with the dark mouth of the mine visible in the hillside beyond. Grant surveyed the scene through his field glasses. "No movement. No horses. We beat them here," Abigail whispered, crouching beside him. "Where should we wait?" Grant considered their options. "The supervisor's cabin likely has the best view of the approach. We'll set up there." They made their way carefully down to the camp, alert for any signs of recent occupation. The buildings stood silent and empty, their doors hanging open on rusted hinges, windows broken by years of harsh weather. The supervisor's cabin, slightly larger than the other structures, stood on a small rise overlooking the camp's entrance. Inside, dust covered the few remaining pieces of furniture: a desk, a chair, and a metal bed frame stripped of its mattress. "This will do," Grant said, checking the sight lines from the windows. "We can see anyone approaching from here." They settled in to wait, Grant cleaning his Winchester rifle while Abigail kept watch. The hours passed slowly, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the abandoned camp. "They should have been here by now," Abigail said eventually, a note of concern in her voice. Grant frowned, sharing her unease. "Maybe they stopped to rest longer than we expected. Or maybe they're not coming at all," she suggested. "What if we misinterpreted their plans?" Before Grant could respond, a faint sound reached them: the distant clatter of hooves on rocky ground. "Someone's coming," he said, moving to the window with his rifle. Through his field glasses, he counted 5 riders approaching the camp from the west. Blackwell and his men, dusty and trail-worn. "It's them," he confirmed, passing the glasses to Abigail. Her face hardened as she recognized the men who had nearly killed her. "What's the plan?" "I want them alive if possible," Grant said, checking his ammunition. "Justice should come from a court, not my gun." "And if they don't surrender?" His expression turned grim. "Then we do what's necessary." They watched as the gang rode into the center of the camp, dismounting near the bunkhouse. Blackwell gestured toward the assay office, and 2 of his men headed in that direction, while the others began unsaddling the horses. "They're splitting up," Grant observed. "This works to our advantage. I'll take Blackwell and the 2 by the horses. You cover the assay office, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary." Abigail nodded, determination in her eyes as she checked the revolver he had given her earlier. "On my signal," Grant instructed. He moved to the cabin door, took a deep breath, then stepped onto the porch with his rifle raised. "Silas Blackwell!" His voice rang out across the clearing. "U.S. Marshal! You and your men drop your weapons and put your hands up!" The reaction was instantaneous. Blackwell and his men dove for cover, drawing their guns as they moved. Shots rang out, splintering the wood around Grant as he ducked back into the doorway. "You're surrounded, Blackwell!" Grant called out, though it was a bluff. "There's no way out of this camp." "The hell we are!" Blackwell shouted back. "I count 2 of you at most. We've got you outnumbered, Marshal!" A bullet whizzed through the cabin window, sending glass shards flying. Abigail flinched but held her position, keeping her revolver trained on the SA office where two of the gang had taken cover. Grant caught her eye across the room. I'm going to work my way around to the stable. Keep them distracted. She nodded, her face pale but determined. As Grant slipped out the back window, Abigail fired 2 shots toward the SA office, careful to aim high. Outside, Grant moved silently through the shadows between buildings, working his way toward the stable where Blackwell had taken position. Gunfire continued to erupt sporadically between the cabin and the outlaws, Abigail doing her part to maintain the illusion of multiple lawmen. Reaching the back of the stable, Grant found a small window and peered inside. Blackwell stood just inside the front door, his gun trained on the cabin. One of his men crouched beside him, reloading. Grant took careful aim through the window and called out, "Drop your weapons! Last chance!" Blackwell whirled, firing wildly in Grant's direction. The marshal ducked, then rose again to find his target. His first shot caught Blackwell's companion in the shoulder, sending the man's gun clattering to the ground. His second forced Blackwell to dive behind a stack of old hay bales. "It's over, Blackwell!" Grant shouted, moving to the stable door. "Surrender now!" "Go to hell, Marshal!" came the response, followed by another barrage of gunfire. Grant waited for a pause in the shooting, then kicked open the stable door, rolling inside and coming up with his rifle aimed at the hay bales. "Throw out your gun, Blackwell!" For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a pistol slid across the dirt floor from behind the hay. "Come out with your hands up," Grant ordered. Blackwell emerged, his hands raised, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over, Marshal." "It is for you," Grant replied, keeping his rifle steady. "On your knees. Hands behind your head." As he secured Blackwell with handcuffs, a scream from the direction of the cabin froze his blood. "Abigail. Stay down," he growled at Blackwell, then raced back toward the cabin, his heart pounding. Gunfire erupted again, 2 shots in rapid succession. Grant rounded the corner to see one of Blackwell's men dragging Abigail from the cabin, a gun to her head. Her face was bloodied, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "Drop your weapon, Marshal!" the outlaw demanded. "Or she dies right now!" Grant stopped, his rifle half raised. "Let her go. This is between us." The outlaw laughed, pressing his gun harder against Abigail's temple. "Seems she matters to you. That makes her valuable. The others are already captured or dead," Grant lied smoothly. "You've got nowhere to go." Doubt flickered across the man's face, but he maintained his grip on Abigail. "I'll take my chances." "Drop the rifle, now!" Grant locked eyes with Abigail, seeing not fear but calculation in her gaze. She gave him the slightest of nods, then suddenly went limp in her captor's arms, dropping her full weight downward. The momentary distraction was all Grant needed. His rifle cracked, and the outlaw fell backward, a bullet in his chest. Abigail scrambled away, retrieving her fallen revolver. "The SA office," she gasped. "One more inside." Grant helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "Just a cut," she assured him, touching the blood on her temple. "He came through the back window." Together, they approached the SA office, moving cautiously from different angles. The last outlaw, seeing his companions defeated, surrendered without further resistance. As the echoes of gunfire faded from the canyon, Grant and Abigail stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by their prisoners. 3 of Blackwell's men were wounded but alive. One lay dead outside the cabin. "It's over," Grant said quietly, placing a gentle hand on Abigail's shoulder. She nodded, the adrenaline of battle giving way to exhaustion. "What happens now?" "We take them back to Redemption Springs, then on to Tucson for trial." He examined the cut on her temple with concern. "That needs tending." As night fell, they secured the prisoners in the bunkhouse, barricading the doors and windows. Grant built a fire outside the supervisor's cabin and carefully cleaned Abigail's wound. "You were remarkable today," he told her as he applied a bandage. Most experienced deputies wouldn't have handled themselves half as well. She smiled tiredly. Does that mean I have a future in law enforcement? I think you have a future in whatever you choose, he replied seriously. You're the most capable woman I've ever met, Abigail Atwood. Their eyes met in the firelight, and this time neither looked away. Grant found himself leaning forward, drawn by something stronger than reason. Abigail's breath caught, but she didn't pull back. When their lips met, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, gentle at first, then deeper as her hands came up to frame his face. Grant pulled her closer, mindful of her injuries but desperate to feel her against him. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Grant rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I shouldn't have done that, he murmured. You're under my protection. I think we protected each other today, Abigail replied softly. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. And I've wanted you to do that since you cut me down from that tree. Grant opened his eyes, studying her face in the flickering light. What happens when this is over? When I take Blackwell to Tucson? That depends, she said, her gaze steady, on whether a U.S. Marshal might consider staying in one place for a while. I've been thinking about that, he admitted. Sheriff Collins will need a deputy while he recovers. Maybe longer. Hope brightened her eyes. Redemption Springs could use a man like you. And would the town's most independent woman consider keeping company with such a man? He asked, his thumb gently caressing her cheek. I believe she would, Abigail whispered, leaning in to kiss him again. Under a blanket of stars, with danger temporarily contained and the future suddenly full of possibilities, they held each other close, two souls who had found each other in the harshest of circumstances. 3 months later, Redemption Springs celebrated two significant events: the official appointment of Grant Forrester as the town's new sheriff following Collins' retirement, and his marriage to Abigail Atwood in a ceremony that brought the entire community together. Standing before the minister in a dress of ivory lace, Abigail's eyes never left Grant's as they spoke their vows. The faint scar around her neck, a reminder of their first meeting, was hidden by a string of pearls, a wedding gift from her new husband. I never thought I'd find a home again after my father died, she told Grant as they danced at their reception. Or someone who would see me as an equal, not just a woman to be protected. You're more than my equal, he replied, holding her close. You're my partner in everything that matters. As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Grant and Abigail stood on the porch of their new home at the edge of town, a small ranch they had purchased together, with room for horses, gardens, and perhaps someday, children. No regrets about giving up the marshal's badge? Abigail asked, leaning against his shoulder. Grant looked down at his wife, still amazed by the twist of fate that had brought them together. None. I've spent my life chasing justice across the territory. Now I've found something worth staying for. And I've found someone worth facing danger with, she replied, her smile filled with promise. Though perhaps we could have a few peaceful years before our next adventure? Grant laughed, pulling her into his arms. I'll do my best, Mrs. Forrester. But with you by my side, I suspect life will never be dull. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, they sealed their agreement with a kiss. Two strong, independent spirits who had found in each other not just love, but a true partnership. The rope that had nearly ended Abigail's life had instead led her to a new beginning, and the cowboy who had cut her down had found his home at last.